Привет. I'm Chuckle Linnick, a Ukrainian-American who was baptized with the name Yaroslav, which happens to also be the name that I use in the historical reenactment group, the Society for Creative Anachronism. A number of months ago, I took it upon myself to wade through Slavic folklore and mythology and Eastern European stuff and to put together videos to try to make this easier to access. Part of that is because of the reenactment group, figuring maybe people want to develop an Eastern European persona. This might be a starting place. So a couple of my videos dealt with an area of folklore about the undead, and I covered the Upiri, which are vampires, and the Polish Straziga, or the Romanian Strigoi, which are sort of vampire-like. And so I was getting into this area of the undead. Well, digging around in my research on the Eastern European folklore and looking at the usual suspects of vampires and werewolves, I came across a reference to the Taxim. The Taxim is an Eastern European name for a mythological undead corporeal revenant created through the reanimation of a corpse. That's a zombie. The ambulant physical remains of mortals whose souls cannot rest in peace. There's an argument that says this isn't Slavic at all, that the word is actually Turkish, but I'm willing to ignore that because it does shamble into Eastern European lore, just like the Strigoi of the non-Slavic Romanians that ends up becoming the Polish Straziga. Okay, usually a person afflicted in this way finds a way out of the grave because he, and a Taxim is invariably male, is determined to extort revenge on some evil or for some evil that they suffered during a mortal existence. The essential difference between the undead and ordinary ghosts is that the latter appear in shadowy or even transparent form, whereas a Taxim, that's corporeal. To make it worse, it ought to appear as someone who's been buried for a while and has clawed their way out of the grave and back to the surface. But not always. That depends on how long the Taxim needs to gather up that supernatural strength required to burst out of a vault or out of the grave to begin that quest for vengeance. If there's enough anger, the Taxim may find its way out of the grave shortly after burial. The tip-off is the dreadful stench of corruption, which is often going to precede a Taxim showing up, and that's going to give a warning of its approach. I'm like, ooh, what's that smell? But I suppose if someone is freshly dead and freshly buried, that the stench probably isn't that strong. A Taxim moves only during the hours of darkness because it's dazzled by daylight and has a fairly limited range. It isn't going to be able to hitch a ride and so must travel on foot over the ground. That should make it comparatively easy to escape a Taxim seeking revenge simply by fleeing immediately to some other part of the country. That might explain ruined and abandoned houses. Some might have been deserted because a Taxim threatened the former residents. Except the Taxim wants vengeance and has nothing else to do. The calendar's clear. Usually, a Taxim has no desire to hurt anybody unknown to it in life, but it can't help inflicting icy fear on them as it shuffles on past, looking for whoever they're going to get their vengeance upon. It seeks only the person upon whom it desires revenge, and until it succeeds, this search is going to go on, and the Taxim is going to arise after dark and set off on its shambling journey through the night, rotting bit by bit until it is no longer able to pursue its quarry. And there's the religious bent here of anyone who has sufficient courage may set a Taxim at rest by confronting it, as it follows its midnight track, and explaining that no, you shouldn't be doing revenge. That's the supreme being. That's his job, who's going to ensure that divine justice is done. Okay, now we got to get into another category, the Zalozhny Pokojniki. Those are the unclean dead. I found out about them when I was gifted this book, like about 25 years ago, by Linda J. Ivanits, Russian Folk Belief. And this is basically where the Russian peasants are kind of looking at who are the unclean dead. The Zalozhny Pokojniki, or unclean dead, those are going to include great sinners, all those who died premature or violent deaths. It's going to include sorcerers. It's going to include witches. It's going to include suicides. It's going to include murder victims, drunkards, the unchristened, and stillborn children. Quite a few there. The devil's got a real rich harvest there. He's supposed to have especially strong connections with suicides. The person's distraught state of mind preceding a suicide, that was taken as a sign of a struggle with the devil. And of course, the suicide itself, hey, that's an indication as to who won. The devil, if you haven't guessed. And in the other world, the suicide becomes what's called a Chertu Baran, and that's a devil's amount. And there's a lot of stories that were told of how the devil rides these strange horses, or he hitches them to his carriage. Why he'd need a carriage, I don't know, except that maybe there's the additional humiliation of, the Chertu Baran dragging the carriage around. And in the province of Vladimir, the devil took the form of a thin gust of wind on a well-traveled road, and it's sweeping down the road to catch the souls of sinners, especially suicides. And that was known as Vystrechnik, and it comes from Vystrecha, or meeting. And it was believed that sometimes you could escape the Vystrechnik by begging forgiveness of the earth. And the last one of these unclean dead, which I have to mention just because it has hit me with me dealing with a grieving process and friends of mine dealing with a grieving process. This other type of devil was called a nalet. And the nalet comes from naletat, to come flying or to swoop down upon. And it was believed to visit and torment those who, and possibly kill those who were excessively depressed following the death of a loved one. Which is why, if you aren't letting go, if you aren't getting over it, you might inadvertently summon a nalet. Okay, so there was a whole grab bag of undead stuff and odd spirits. I'm going to find more stuff to talk about in this channel. I do hope you subscribe to it, because that'd be like really cool. And until the next time, do побачення.